Today we are taking a look at the state of healers in the Midnight Beta. Not necessarily really to look about their current numbers in the beta or who is the most powerful, because it's bound of course to change multiple times before the release of the expansion, but rather about their current situation. How are they playing? How are their buttons? How well have they survived the pruning from the War Within in losing their buttons? And what is their current philosophy on how they are healing? How are their apex talents fitting in the spec in the Midnight Beta, etc, etc. So we are starting with Holy Paladin. Holy Paladin has gotten quite a few knocks from the pruning of the War Within, because Holy Paladin, strictly in terms of buttons, it's losing Divine Toll, it's losing Holy Prism, Barrier of Fate, you are losing Tears Deliverance, you are also losing Hand of Divinity, which is already 5 straight up buttons you are losing. You're also losing Hammer of Wrath, because now it's only available as a replacement to Judgment when you are into Wings. And then you're partially, kind of actually fully losing your Crusader Strike, because now it's only coming in available if you play with Avenging Crusader and when Avenging Crusader is active. So you have lost quite a significant amount of buttons. Now, the spec still plays quite nice if you manage to add to your rotation your Crusader Strike playing with Avenging Crusader. It does become kind of visible though. If you're playing outside of it, you will be in situations where you're only 2 easily, readily spammable buttons on a short cooldown. Holy Shock and Judgment are still on cooldown, and you have nothing else to press. That can become pretty visible. Now, that is where you tie in the age-old debate of playing Holy Paladin, which is Blizzard's fixation on splitting the spec between the melee version and the caster version, which means that even now, in Midnight, you will still find talents like useless buffing of Holy Light, more useless buffing of Holy Light or Flash of Light, even more useless buffing of Holy Light. A series of talents meant to buff abilities you don't really want to use. It's yet another expansion where it is hard to justify playing this caster themed version of Holy Paladin. It's still just good enough to play Flash of Light now and again. You still have your Infusion of Light, you still get to have now a pretty good version of Infusion of Light because your Flash of Light now is instant, so you can kind of roleplay as being a melee spec that doesn't need to cast, because Flash of Light being instant and healing for a lot makes playing around Infusion of Light worthwhile, but you still have the annoyance of being split between having to choose some of these caster themed talents and then your usual straightforward melee version of Holy Paladin. You definitely do feel though the lack of one of your buttons. I would say in particular Hammer of Wrath, you know, one of those talents to give you the free procs of Hammer of Wrath even outside of execute range, to give you something else to click, as well as the usual rotating Crusader Strike, which is now gone. Those you will feel in your rotation. The other thing you will feel, of course, is the loss of cooldowns, especially if you don't even take Avenging Crusader but you stay with the longer cooldown of Wings. You won't have Divine Toll as an extra, you won't have Tears Deliverance, Hand of Divinity, you won't have Holy Prism as an extra. You just have now Wings or your Avenging Crusader, one of those two, to support your Aura Mastery. That also is kind of felt in your buttons. The last of the bits for Holy Paladin in their current situation is that their apex talent is ungodly boring. Picking up the Savior while doing some pretty nice passive healing is just that. It is passive healing. It is automatically going to smart target the lowest HP member around you, the lowest HP ally, and then funnel 70% of your healing into that ally until it's high enough HP. And then when a new ally drops below 50% HP, the beacon is going to transfer to that ally, and you will continue to passively heal low HP members of your party. But it won't give you any procs, any resets of cooldowns, any extra buttons worth pressing, nothing like that. It's just continuously passive and in the background. So while you haven't lost your theme and your philosophy, you still have your Holy Shock to build up and do either healing or damage. You still get to choose your beacons if you want double beacon or if you want the single beacon of virtue, I guess burst healing. You still get to choose between Wings or Avenging Crusader and a more melee-focused, even more melee-focused version. I would say the downside is the loss of a few too many buttons, both in terms of your rotation and in terms of your cooldowns. The slightly boring-ish Apex talent that just works a bit too much in the background. All in all though, it's not too bad for the spec. Talking about not too bad, but still somewhat slightly better, we have Preservation Evoker. Preservation Evoker is looking very good. They have been receiving QOLs from the War Within to streamline and simplify the spec, which was, to be fair, somewhat expected given that Evoker was one of the more complex healers, and if Blizzard's quest was to simplify healers, then Evoker was going to be one of the main targets for this. The fact that Call of Ysera is no longer tied to you using Verdant Embrace is very good. The fact that Lifebind now, the cheese around Lifebind is no longer necessary, although both of these will lower the skill ceiling of this spec because it won't require nearly as much planning. It has made healing overall more smooth, less requiring a series of blocks to be put on top of each other to make your healing work. Now it's more simple. Unlike Holy Paladin, your hero talent is greatly changing the effects of your buttons because it does replace your reversion whenever it procs with Meritra's Blessing, which is essentially the replacement of Spirit Bloom. Talking about pruning, Evoker has lost Emerald Communion, they have lost Spirit Bloom, but beyond that, everything else is still there. If anything, you even have slightly more things now, because you can get the double charge on your Verdant Embrace. Your Temporal Anomaly, especially if you play, for example, in Mythic Plus, has a much shorter cooldown. And now with the often procs of Meritra's Blessing, you have essentially multiple charges of reversion. Whenever it changes to Meritra's Blessing, it won't consume a charge of reversion, so you have more things to press. And less tied to setup, less tied to having to set up a previous buff effect for those spells to work, which makes it pretty satisfying to work. Now, the main question of the state of play of Evoker at the moment for Preservation is just how much you're enjoying Emerald Blossom. Because I'm afraid there is not going to be any escape in Midnight for you playing with Emerald Blossom. Blizzard has tried time and time again since the inception of Preservation to make Emerald Blossom work. They piled on QOL after QOL and buffs after buffs to Emerald Blossom and failed every single time. Evokers still did not play with Emerald Blossom. Now it's gonna be, I would say, nearly impossible to just ignore playing with Emerald Blossom. Blizzard went as far as even giving you a tier set tied around Emerald Blossom, because now Verdant Embrace grows an Emerald Blossom on your target at 100% effectiveness, on top of reducing the cooldown of Verdant Embrace, so you get to use it more often and spawn even more Emerald Blossoms. And remember, you have the new talent, Wings of Liberty, which can give you 2 charges of Verdant Embrace, so you can technically double Verdant Embrace to double spawn a free blossom on top of casting your own blossoms. There has also been added plenty of extra talents or buffed already existing talents like Ouroboros for a stronger Emerald Blossom, Titan's Gift for a stronger Emerald Blossom, and synergy within Echo and Emerald Blossom, because now casting Emerald Blossom makes you double cast Echo, so it gives you a 2 free essences worth of Echo being cast. So the spec is still looking quite good, despite the few things they have lost and the few buffs which gave them some higher skill ceiling in the difficulty in them to plan their cooldowns, for example. Not to mention the whole planning of the cooldown of Flame Shaper is completely gone, because the whole way Evoker has worked in the raid, this entire expansion, has been deleted from the game. Consume Flame is no longer this big burst button you get to press, it's just a passive minor extra healing you get to do. This is no longer the be-all end-all of the zero talent either, so it is simplified and streamlined, but it still plays quite nicely. The Apex talent as well also still give you something extra to press and to work around. They are not really that passive, they do actively change what you want to do, and they are going to be reintroducing something that you haven't really played with in a long time, which is Blossom. Emerald Blossom, compared to basically all the other previous versions of Preservation Evoker. So for them, pretty good marks right now, pretty high marks in the way the spec has been working so far in Midnight, in the beta. Now, however, after them, on a high note, we have to go back on the bad notes of the specs we are almost entirely excluding from this list, which is starting number 1 with Resto Shaman. So Resto Shaman has gone in somewhat of a downward spiral of simplification, or very simply the escape of the IQ from the spec. It has been made very, very simple and very, very straightforward. Now, with what has been going down right now in the Midnight beta, this is the result. The result is that you are, even in Mythic Plus, for example, back to just going Healing Wave Riptide and somewhat ignoring everything else you have available. In terms of possible skill ceiling, you have even lost Cloudburst, so you don't get to think about when to place your totems, because now you just have bonus increases to your healing stream totem only, so you don't even have to think about that. Your Apex talent, talking about passive Apex talents that don't do much, this entire Apex talent is just going to make your next healing stream totem that much more powerful, and that's it. So it's just more casts of a much more powerful healing stream totem, but that's just about it. The remainder of your style at the moment remains just Healing Wave Riptide. So that's why we are excluding them in their current state of play, since their current state of play is terrible and something needs to be done to deal with this abomination before Midnight goes live. They have been hurt quite a bit in terms of the series of, for example, chain heal multipliers, or even just healing wave multipliers like tidal waves going away, not having to think about that, not having to think about Cloudburst, not having to think about Tidebringer charges. It's just a lot of simplification right now for Resto Shaman, which unfortunately has streamlined the spec a bit too much, both in Mythic Plus and in the raid. Now, the second one of the specs that have a problem at the moment is Holy Priest. Because right now, this is essentially what you're going to be clicking when you are in Mythic Plus, for example, or right now even in the raid. So the situation is that even Blizzard admitted they are giving up on making Sanctify work as a button. So they straight up give you a button to ignore Sanctify, to remove Sanctify completely, make Serenity stronger, and then talents that affect Holy Word Sanctify are now going to affect Holy Word Serenity, all of them, including things like pressing Prayer of Healing reduces the cooldown of Sanctify. Now this is gonna reduce the cooldown of Serenity instead. This, however, is perhaps a bit too extremely streamlining the way the spec works. Your Apex talent, we are back into Holy Paladin territory. They are brain dead. It doesn't do much of anything, because Prayer of Mending has a chance to upgrade your next Flesh Heal to Benediction, or simply during Apotheosis, Flesh Heal is upgraded to Benediction. But all of this very simply means that instead of having the base heal of 22k, you enter Apotheosis and now the base heal is 14k. You're like, wait a second, what? Why is it weaker? Why, if I get rid of my Apotheosis, the number goes up again? That's because you get the extra Cosmic Ripple effects. The Cosmic Ripple, which used to be a part of your, or still is a part of your talents, even now in the War Within, now has been made part essentially of your toolkit, even down to your Apex talents. So you do have an Apex talent system which very simply replaces, much like we saw for Holy Paladin, replaces a button with a different one, but you still do the same thing with that button. And that's it. That's all you have left. It's single target heal, single target jumping, smart heal, and big heal. That's it. That is all at the moment you have available for Holy Priest. All the other functions right now have failed. This continues season after season to fail horribly. Now you've even failed attempting to play with Sanctify at the moment. You have lost the dynamic weaving of Flesh Heal and Greater Heal, because now it has simply been replaced by making your Flesh Heal or Prayer of Healing stronger without the need or the use of Greater Heal. And then your free procs of Apotheosis, at least getting something extra, at least a free proc, something to change up and make you feel a little bit better, is gone completely. here used to lay answered prayers, your free proc of Apotheosis after 50 jumps of Prayer of Mending charges. Now it's gone as well. Don't forget any further buttons from Oracle are gone, because now all of your premonitions are just passive effects that work in the background. So as mentioned, the remainder is terrible at the moment for Holy Priest. Quite disappointing. The next one we are talking about is right next to Holy, because it's Discipline. So Discipline right now is doing quite well. Never mind what was going down in the raid. As we said, we're not talking about numbers. So Discipline has changed greatly right now. To be fair, the great change doesn't affect Mythic Plus as much, because the whole ramp thing, the whole renew power shield, single target long ramp windows weren't really there in Mythic Plus. So technically for you, Mythic Plus player, that's not a big change. However, what is more visible right now is that the value of your atonement has gone down greatly. Gone are the days where you will be doing 50 plus, 60, 70, whatever percent of your healing done from your atonement alone. Now, Flash Heal has a pretty good value, your Power Shield, but more importantly Penance and your Apex Talent has huge value, which go beyond just your atonement healing. So the gist of it is that now you have 2 charges of Penance, and every time you Penance you have a chance to upgrade Power Shield into Void Shield. The power of Void Shield is not only that it can still benefit from all of the buffs of your Power Shield, like for example Will and Woe, making your next Power Shield up to 30% stronger, but also that it hits and targets 3 players while still putting Atonement on them. So it's a triple Power Shield, still benefiting from all the buffs of Power Shield and still applying Atonement, so it's also a triple Atonement. That is a lot of the value of Discipline Priest right now. In Mythic Plus is very good, because it's a 3-target smart targeting. Power Shield is almost always gonna basically ignore the tank and hit the important players, so the squishy players, you and the DPS. And besides that, in terms of buttons, you haven't lost too much, in the sense that your Smite, Penance, Flash Heal, Power Shield, Shadow War Pain, Radiance, Shadow War Death, and Mind Blast are all still there. They're all still part of your rotations like normal. You're just putting slightly less value and slightly less power inside of your Atonement when it comes to Mythic Plus. Even more so than what current Oracle Discipline Priest was doing. Remember Season 2's meta, where the huge Power Shields was what made Discipline meta in Mythic Plus, and less about their Atonement healing, which was ironically their weakest point in Mythic Plus. The situation does change more in the raid, although this is still a bit more in the works. In the way you work, of course, Atonement in the raid will be more powerful, because you can spread your Atonement to 20 players. So it has way more value than something like Void Shield, which is still only hitting 3. But what is changing more, of course, are your ramp windows, where it will be likely less viable for you to play around with Plea and spread your atonements the same way you were with Renew, for example, right now in live. You definitely do have faster ramps now with Evangelism, giving you your instacast Radiance and then this discounted casts of Radiance after, so at least once every 90 seconds. That's still going to be very powerful. But all in all, if we were talking about the state of funness of Discipline, then not really too much has changed in what could make you enjoy the spec. Unless you were full on in the shadow version, shadow damage, shadow healing and mind bender side of the spec, which is kind of dead right now. It's quite weak and not nearly as viable. Then the spec is still doing quite fine in terms of buttons they have available, the buttons they have not lost compared to live. Then Discipline is doing definitely much better than Holy Priest at the moment. Now back to another cancelled spec for now, although Rejoice is not cancelled the same way as Resto Shaman or cancelled the same way as Holy Priest. This is cancelled because, number one, it has been quite bugged, mostly themed around their Apex talents, but also the changes of their talents working with their hero talents, which they weren't. It's Mistweaver Monk. So Mistweaver has a few problems right now tied to this new Apex talent spirit font and spawning this free soothing mist and also cleaving around up to 5 allies. So technically in a group, in a Mythic Plus group, you would be able to cleave your entire party with this soothing mist. It has a few bugs that were not making this work or still not make this work. For example, it doesn't spread, it doesn't cleave if your targets were at full HP, which is kind of a problem. You also had changes because they also changed the way Aspect of Harmony and your Coalescence works with the changes of your Vivify, which can now be replaced by Shelnu's Gift. Now, instead of generating it, it was drawing to heal 4 more, except it was bugged and it wasn't working. You also had Jade Empowerment being bugged and players being happy abusing this because it wasn't doing reduced damage to the other targets, it was doing full damage if you were taking Jade Empowerment, which was doing a lot. As mentioned, if you were taking Shelnu's Gift, which you kind of want to do, you were breaking Harmonic Surge and not making it work. Your set bonus somehow will also gotten to be broken. Casting Thunder Focus Tea, applying a Renewing Mist for 20 seconds onto a nearby ally. If you created it with your tier set, you were completely breaking Rising Mist and not making it extend this free Renewing Mist. So since only a few of these things have been fixed for now, I'm not in the mood for judging Mistweaver Monk yet based on all of these broken things, but even just as a teaser, it's looking very good. It has way more options than before, although maybe it's just because of beta. I'm about to say tons of different builds and viable ways of playing Mistweaver, for example, in Mythic Plus, whether or not you are playing or completely ignoring the new Shelnu's Gift, whether you're playing with Rising Mist, or the completely changed and Enveloping Mist focused Tier of Mourning, if you are or not playing with Emperor's Elixir, if you're bothering to play with the damage increase of Jade Empowerment, or you want to go down the Dance of Chi-Ji to buff your Spinning Crane Kick. A lot of work has to be done in the tier recrafting because now the value of Enveloping Mist has been giga buffed, more than double the coefficient of spell power than before in Midnight compared to the War Within, which suddenly now gives way more value to talents like Misty Peaks, because applying Enveloping Mist for 2 seconds, now that Enveloping Mist is more than twice as strong as it was in the War Within, it's much better. But for now, we're still waiting on giving a full judgment on the spec to wait for it to actually be properly fixed, especially Master of Harmony, which is the more Mythic Plus focused hero talent, since it was much more broken compared to Conduit. This leaves us with the last healer of the bunch, Resto Druid. Just in case you're wondering, it is the strongest healer right now in the beta numerically for Mythic Plus, for example, but that doesn't matter at the moment. So the state of Resto Druid has remained remarkably similar to the War Within. There have been, of course, a few changes in terms of pruning, like for example, you have gotten Flourish cooked. The poor piss version of what Flourish used to be has been cooked into Trunk as a button. Now you only have Convoke an Incarnation as your other option as a button. Some QOLs, like now you can get a free Efflorescence if you cast Life Bloom. Now Efflorescence gets cast and then follows you whenever your Life Bloom, for example, blooms. Your Efflorescence still moves around the target, which is a decent save of a GCD if you want to take this. And the fact that now your Treants are completely passive. Now they spawn off of casting Swiftmend or Wild Growth, so you don't have to actually use them yourself. You just get them out with one or the other, right? Or both. Of course, you can cast both and get multiples of them out, but they are passive now. And the fact that now Soul of the Forest is out of buffing Wild Growth. So the age-old Swiftmend into Wild Growth is no longer necessary now. It actually already stopped being necessary throughout the War Within because of how much Regrowth was being buffed, that this one basically made it more viable to use it on Regrowth, especially with Rampant Growth as well. But now that this applies Regrowth to 2 additional targets as well as Reju, so it's a triple cast Regrowth or a triple cast Reju after every Swiftmend because of Power of the Archdruid. Now, the Apex talents are completely anachronistic. It's a new word for you, but it's correct in here because it goes back years past, trying to buff Life Bloom, which is just not really doing much it doesn't really synergize with almost anything in your tree, neither playing with Keeper or playing with Wild Stalker. You have anything in here actually working with Life Bloom. If Thriving Growth, so the spawn, the beginning of the spawn of your vines, also included Life Bloom, then maybe it made sense. But as you can see, because you can read, I hope, Wild Growth, Regrowth, and Efflorescence healing as a chance for the blooms to spawn, not Life Bloom. So it feels like a bit off to have these Apex Talents based on Life Bloom. The rest of your kit though is the same. You're still blanketing players with Reju, you're still using Wild Growth before a damage events, for example, in your party, and then you're still using Regrowth, which has been progressively getting beefed up to be a super strong button. And now it has grown to be even stronger because of Nature's Bounty. Regrowth heals all other allies with Regrowth for 20% of its healing. Hold on a second, this might be a bit too much. If we already give players the extra 40% crit chance, plus even higher crit chance on Abundance, plus when Regrowth crits, it heals for 300% of the heal instead of 200% of the heal, maybe it's a bit too much. So they cut it down to 20%, but it's still making you play even more around Regrowth now. Regrowth is still super beefed up. It has, I believe, gotten to the point where it is out healing the hot of Reju. Despite the fact that the instant heal of Regrowth is also huge and Reju doesn't have an instant heal, now even the hot is on par with Reju's hot. So you have remained very similar. You have an Apex Talent somewhat out of style because it doesn't really do much. Playing around Life Bloom is not really what you're doing right now. You have lost a few cool things like the whole logic behind ramping with your Rejus and then using Flourish. That's gone. Basically, in Midnight, these 1 minute ramp windows for Reju are a thing of the past. So now you are even more of a straight forward healer in the raid, for example. You don't have those 1 minute cycle windows. You are way more consistent because of your Regrowth healing. And in Mythic Plus with Wild Stalker, it's more of the same, except more depressing now because healers somehow are doing even less damage than they are in the War Within. But the rest of your toolkit is still there, you haven't really lost much of anything else, and Regrowth has gotten even stronger. So I would still say it's quite fine, the situation for Resto Druid. I would put, in the end, Resto Druid up there with Preservation Evoker in terms of good ones, quite good ones. In the middle, I would put Holy Paladin and Discipline Priest in terms of looking quite nice, although having been changed a bit. You know, Holy Paladin has lost quite a lot of buttons while still playing nicely enough, whereas Discipline Priest hasn't really lost that many buttons, but the focus moving away from Atonement Healing, for example, into other buttons might tick a few players off, especially the ones that were very into these long, complicated, high skill ceiling ramps needed or wanted by the Disc Priest. And then at the bottom you have Resto Shaman and Holy Priest, which are just looking rough right now across all levels, with the question mark being Mistweaver Monk, which looks still quite good. I would have put it probably up there with Resto Druid and Preservation Evoker, given a few less, some fewer amounts of bugs and problems with the spec. Once those are fixed though, it still looks very nice. So this is what I would say is the situation for the healers in the Midnight beta based on how they have been playing so far. This is how they have been going in the beta for now, so we can leave each other on this Friday and, according to some, the beginning of the weekend. So with this out of the way, we're now leaving each other by saying our goodbyes, thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, so we planned 5, 10, 15, 20, 23 or 4, but I think it went overboard again.